Thank you for watching Denver 7. I'm Landon Hoff. We're interrupting our morning news repeat for a special little event here. We have the Thursday night football game on our air on Denver 7 this Thursday night. Denver Broncos, New York Jets. And right now, Denver 7 Broncos insider Troy Rank, as well as our digital journalist Ryan Osborne, are chatting 7 best moments in Broncos history. This is a chat that's simulcasting on our Facebook Live. So if you're watching here and you want to join them and comment back and forth there, go for it. But let's listen in to the guys talking some Broncos.
It's sometimes hard to measure how an impact that an owner has unless things are going bad. But BOWLEN, that was not the case. He was great, and he kind of set a standard for the Broncos, didn't he?
Yeah, you have to understand when he bought the team, there was a lot of suspicion of what his motives were. Here's this Canadian who loved Oklahoma football, but his goal was kind of to buy a team in the Canadian Football League. So would he be overmatched? And then he showed up with, he's wearing sunglasses and fur coats on the sidelines. And like, who is this, foreign, kind of a foreigner to the Colorado sports scene? But what people didn't understand then, and certainly played out over the course of 3 decades, he's one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. I mean, he is type A in every way. He was a triathlete, a very competitive and a good triathlete while owning the Broncos. And so he would expect the excellence in every facet of the organization. And certainly he benefited from taking over the team, Ryan, when John Elway was the quarterback. Just being the owner wouldn't have translated to the success it did. But having Elway mirror kind of as they came in together, that helped. But let's not discount Pat Bowlen's impact, because it basically, when you walk into the locker room at the new facility, it has I might be missing this quote by a little bit. It's just like, expect excellence in everything and kind of be the best at everything. That's not an accident. And his presence was there. I started covering the team back in the 90s. I covered their first 2 Super Bowl teams, and Bowlen's presence was felt. He was out at practice. What was so unique about Pat Bowlen is I've covered a lot of pro sports owners. He was demanding, but he never meddled. He would make it known. It's like the teacher that kind of gives you a glare and says, hey, that's like the expectation. He hired the right people. He trusted them to do their jobs. And if he didn't, he moved on. And that's what made him so great. And he did have a relationship with the players. He would hang out a lot in the trainer's room because he would get off. They would land like a DIA, and he would ride his bike home. He would start his summer camp and ride his bike from Denver to Greeley.
Wow.
I mean, this is a guy that was so competitive. Again, they would land in a new city for a road game, and he'd get out, pull his bike out, and ride to the hotel. And the players saw this, but he did strike a relationship up with them in the trainer's room. That's where he kind of get the pulse of the team. It's where he became best friends with Steve Antonopoulos, the Greek, where he kind of get a feel for the vibe. But he also did the weekly pick 'em pull with the players. You pick Oklahoma every week, but that's how they kind of got to know and basically become friendly with him. And the other thing, final point on Pat Bowlen on our list here of the seven biggest moments in Broncos history, and no fans, nothing from recent history from 16 on is in there, so you're safe. But the thing with Pat Bowlen is he listened to his players. They said that we want like video stuff in the locker room. You got it. We want extra seats on the plane. You got it. You want free movies when you go to the hotel for a road game? We'll cover it. With the expectation, and they had the biggest coaching staff. He was gonna put you in every position to succeed. So as a player, your job was go out, play well, no excuses. And they miss it. They miss it every day without him. I mean, that's not disrespectful to Joe Ellis and the way it's run now. Pat Bowlen was a figure that you felt his presence when I'm talking as a media member, you walk into the media room, you knew he was in the building.
Yeah, he's a Hall of Famer for a reason, and that's a pretty high honor for an owner to reach that level, to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Moving on to moment number 6, Broncos signing Peyton Manning in 2012 as a free agent. The Broncos had gone through this sort of up and down period after Elway. They had found a couple good quarterbacks. Brian Griese had some success. Jay Cutler obviously had some success, and then of course the Tebow year. But Manning really elevated this franchise back to an elite level. How big was it for Elway to kind of find his successor, even though it was so many years after he retired? I mean, he was very integral in getting Manning signed and taking the Broncos back to an elite level.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to know why Bronco fans are spoiled in some sense, is because You have 16 years of Elway and 4 years of Peyton Manning. It's not unlike Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. You just don't see this in NFL history where you go from a Hall of Famer and there was a little break and another Hall of Famer. Peyton Manning was looking for a team preferably in the AFC. He didn't want to go up against his brother Eli in the NFC. At that time when this signing was going on, remember, they were pursuing it. They were kind of the Yankees of the NFL. They were going for it. They signed T.J. Ward. They signed DeMarcus Ware. They signed Aqib Talib. Like, this is a team that's going for it. And these guys all came to join Peyton Manning. So the key is Peyton Manning. He's the magnet. So how do you make that happen? John Elway is a good recruiter in that regard, knowing that Peyton Manning wanted to probably stay out of the NFC again. He didn't really want to face his brother Eli if they were playing in a playoff game. But also what was interesting about how they slow played this, some of these other teams, Tennessee, even where was Harbaugh at that point? San Francisco, they were kind of putting the pressure on Manning to make a decision. And if you know anything about Peyton Manning, he does everything on his timeline, very scheduled, very organized. And when he was getting pressured by those other teams, he wasn't comfortable. And Elway and John Fox slow played it. Basically like, hey, we'll go see you and we'll take a look. And whenever you're ready, call us. And it was brilliant because it allowed Peyton to be like, wow, they just want me to decide. They're not putting me on somebody's timetable, even though there was one, but they weren't pressing him. So that was huge. I was covering the Rockies at that time. So my source on kind of what was going on was Todd Helton, who was good friends with Peyton Manning. And he was kind of saying, he didn't expect it to be Tennessee because there's just so much pressure of him returning back there. And it's almost suffocating even for someone like him. San Francisco was a great fit in terms of the roster, but John Harbaugh, Manning, personality fit, probably not ideal. John Fox and Elway allow Manning to come in, sign, and Fox essentially says, Peyton, it's your offense. Do whatever you want. It was the perfect landing spot. And Manning, I'm telling you, he could wake up any day of the week and just win a game for you. The guy could wake up every season and win 11 to 13 games. And what's huge difference with when people ask me about Peyton Manning, everything mattered. Every detail mattered. Every blade of grass, every audible. I once saw him do 30 minutes of audible work with Emmanuel Sanders after a practice where they never even used a football. It was crazy. But that's how attentive he was to detail. But Peyton Manning cared about every detail, and he made other players care. It was uncomfortable playing for him. If you were an offensive player, you better be studying and in the playbook. You better be on point. But it changed everything. You ask about what changed when they signed Peyton Manning. They became the national team. Mm-hmm. They maxed out on primetime games. They were in many ways America's team his 4 years in Denver, and he was holding on by dental floss at the end in that Super Bowl. His plantar fasciitis in his foot. He had a quad injury. His arm strength was shot. But I talked to some guys from that team a couple days ago, and they were just like, nothing against Brock. He helped get us there, but Peyton Manning was going to take us to the finish line. They love Peyton Manning in that way.
Yeah, and we'll get to Elway's greatness here in a second. But, the NFL had changed so much between when Elway played to Manning's era, and partly because Manning was putting up just ridiculous numbers and really opened up the passing game for the rest of the league. But, he had the greatest season as a quarterback in Denver history statistically, and then you could probably argue as just overall too. The numbers he was putting up was just crazy, wasn't it? Compared to anything we've seen in Denver, not taking away from Elway in his era, but just the stats that Manning was putting up had to be pretty impressive to see.
Yeah, 7 touchdowns in a single game, 5 touchdowns in a season. He had 1,000-yard receivers everywhere you looked, from Welker to Demaryius Thomas to Eric Decker to Noshawn Marino to Julius Thomas in terms of just touchdowns from a tight end. And it's just amazing how he could just clinically dissect a defense. He would look for a point, and if the safety was cheating over 1 foot, it was like, we're going here. Okay, he's going to cheat back to there, we're going here. He'd audible into it, and he just dissected. He'd crush bad teams. But even good teams, he gave you every opportunity to win. The one stat I'll show you, what makes Peyton Manning so different. The Broncos' road record when Peyton Manning was on the team, he missed a few road games, but not many. They were 22-10 on the road. Since he retired, they're 10-23 on the road. Wow. That's what a good quarterback does, and not in this case, a great all-time quarterback. They give you a chance to win anywhere, anytime, and you never feel like you're out of the game. Mm-hmm. And that's how it was with Elway. It was just different because Elway would play rather ordinary statistically for 3 quarters, and then he would crush you in the fourth. He had ability to win a game late like nothing I've ever seen. Manning was just clinical in his dissection of teams. If they were off point in any way, he exploited it like that.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll get on the moment number 5 here. This was a big one. A lot of Bronco fans today may not realize the Broncos did not draft John Elway. They traded for him. He was taken number 1 overall by the Baltimore Colts. He did not want to play for the Colts. He made that known. He had the press conference with his dad where he announced he was going to play baseball for the Yankees. And then that kind of just forced the Colts' hand to make a trade with the Broncos, and it turned out to probably be the most lopsided trade in NFL history, and clearly the trade that changed the Broncos franchise forever. Troy, how? I mean, it's hard to sum up in just a short amount of time, but to make that trade, I think they sent an offensive lineman, Chris Hinton, and then a decent veteran quarterback. But clearly the return for Elway was not just on the field, but off the field as a franchise. I mean, this changed the direction of the franchise for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Colorado. I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, Southern Colorado. But the acquisition of John Elway it's hard to explain. This is pre-Twitter. This is pre-ESPN ticker, pre-cut into programming. But Elway was a national story, but locally it was covered as if, the Pope was coming to town. Like everything he did was news. The Halloween candy he passed out, where he went, where he drove. I mean, he was received in a way like no superstar has been received here. I mean, David Thompson was kind of along those lines, but he wasn't a Bronco. The Broncos in many ways are the state religion, and Elway arrives as the savior. In that first year, it was ugly. Anyone will tell you that, but by his third year, he's arguably the best player in the NFL, and he's doing stuff that, none of us have ever seen in terms of his arm strength and his ability to rally teams late, where they're down and they look awful, and then all of a sudden, the last 2 minutes of a game, you can't stop the guy. And certainly his teammates felt that. But the acquisition of it was so fascinating because Jack Elway, remember, his dad was a college coach. He knew Frank Kush, the coach of the Colts. He told them, don't draft him. Like they basically were saying, he's not playing for Frank Kush. My son is not going to play for this guy who's known for kind of his militaristic practices and demands, and his offense was maybe archaic. He was never going to play for him, and yet they still drafted him. And Elway had the leverage of baseball. Gary Hughes, God rest his soul, the scout that signed Elway for the Yankees, he just passed away last week. I knew Gary. But Elway, everyone I talked to about baseball believes he would have been the starting right fielder for the Yankees at some point on the teams with Don Mattingly. Those Yankee teams, frankly, were pretty bad in that era until Jeter arrived. But Elway had the leverage of baseball. He really did. Most guys say it, they don't. He had it. I mean, you can imagine he had a cannon from right field, and he could hit. I mean, he wasn't a great hitter, but he's certainly a good enough hitter to reach the big leagues. But John Elway arriving changed everything because of his ability was so unique. I haven't seen a college quarterback like him since Andrew Luck would be the only comp that I could say in terms of the physicality and arm strength and ability to do things. But when he arrived, it was ugly early. He was splitting time with Steve DeBerg. But once he finally gained traction, he just did things none of us have ever seen before. Run around, scramble, and then stop and throw the 65, 70-yard pass in the air. And you're like, what just happened? I've never seen anything like that. So, yeah, to me, that moment, it changed everything in terms of the next 2 decades.
So we're going to back up a few years from the Elway trade to 1978. The Broncos beat the Oakland Raiders in the 1978 AFC Championship game. This is 1977 season. That sent the Broncos to their first Super Bowl. They lost to the Cowboys 27-10. But Troy, you made the point when we were putting this list together that this kind of put Denver sports on the map. It was no longer kind of that, dusty old cowtown of the NFL that it may have been known as. It made them more of a national presence. They were so popular among fans here locally, but it kind of gave them a more national recognition as a team. How important was it to kind of elevate this franchise from local popularity to national relevance?
Yeah, I mean, people forget because of the success over like a 25-year span, Ryan. From 62 to 73, they were one of the worst teams in all professional sports. I mean, they were god-awful. And then they start finally turning it around in the early 70s. and with Red Miller, the right fit mix as head coach, Craig Morton, the old veteran savvy quarterback from the New York Giants, you pick up. You got guys like Haven Moses, but Tom Jackson, a leader. And they've developed this kind of pseudo rivalry with the Raiders, this hatred for all things Raiders. And to beat the Raiders was like, it'd be the equivalent, honestly, if it had the Nuggets beating the Lakers to move in to the NBA Finals. That was kind of like, if you beat the Raiders, you were the class of the AFC, because the Raiders were dominant during that time, Raiders and Dolphins. And they beat Ken Stabler. They beat John Madden. And Tom Jackson and that team, they were just so lovable to fans, the way they won. And their defense, the Orange Crush defense, let's not forget, that was their first great defense prior to 2015. You had Randy Gradishar, you had Swenson, you had Louis Wright. You just had a number of guys who frankly should be in the Hall of Fame. Louis Wright and Randy Gradishar, for me, should be in the Hall of Fame. They were that good. But like you mentioned, Ryan, it wasn't like they were on TV a lot. They were a terrible team for a decade. But that moment put Denver sports on the map. Because Denver gets lost even today, because we're, in the Mountain Time Zone. There's no other professional sports team in this time zone in terms of the Rockies and in the NFL. And so it's like sometimes this weird vacuum of, it's Colorado and it snows all the time and people know you from Aspen and skiing. And it's the Broncos became part of the state's identity. And that moment, it just legitimized Colorado. It's like one of those things when you live here and your team goes, it's like it gives everyone a better feeling. It just like, that's who we are, and people that grew up here and watched that, it just changed how you view yourself. It's hard to explain. So without that team, there's not the teams that eventually won the Super Bowl. That was the beginning. That was like, if you go back to the history of how the Denver Broncos became so important to this community, it was that win. The Super Bowl, they got crushed, but that win changed and made them relevant.
Mm-hmm. And then now kind of going back to more recent history, the 2016 Super Bowl, this is 2015 season, Broncos beat the Carolina Panthers to win Super Bowl 50. This was the Broncos' official return to the top of the NFL after almost 20 seasons of trying to get back to that level and getting back to a Super Bowl, but not winning it, and then getting to the level of Peyton Manning, that he goes out on top, a champion. But Manning, that this will be remembered as Manning's final season. But this was the Von Miller game. This is the defense. This is that defense after losing to the Seahawks in the Super Bowl a couple years before that, to have Elway build this defense into a Super Bowl champion. They dominated that game, and Von Miller made some of the biggest plays of his life in the Super Bowl 50.
Yeah, I wrote a book for the Denver Post about this season. Because like you said, all these factors intersected and kind of came together perfectly with Gary Kubiak returning, the former backup quarterback and offensive coordinator, who had the pulse of the team, and talking to veterans recently about this of when did you think you had a chance to win a Super Bowl? And a bunch of them said, well, we didn't think it would be that year. We just felt like maybe we were 2 years away. And then when Kubiak starts giving veterans days off in camp, and they're like, wow, we're rested. So when we practice, we're practicing up tempo. We're going fast and we're competitive. And then they start looking around and saying, man, this defense, we can be historically great. When you start looking at Malik Jackson in the middle with Derek Wolfe and Von Miller in his full prime at that point, and you have a secondary in the no-fly zone with Aqib Talib, in my opinion, should be a Hall of Famer, T.J. Ward, a Pro Bowler, Chris Harris, a Pro Bowler, Darian Stewart, a solid player. They just had excellence at every level of the defense. They felt like they could win games. That defense, Ryan, scored 6 touchdowns during the season. The defense was one of its best offensive players. And they had to be, frankly, because the offense really started to grind and struggle the part of that season. But they got to a moment, 9-2 at Pittsburgh. They lose at Pittsburgh. They were up in that game. Brock played terribly in the second half. Gary Kubiak goes in the locker room, basically an impassioned speech for him. And Gary Kubiak's kind of the E.F. Hutton. When he talked, people listened. And so there was always meaning when he did say it. He kind of gathered the guys around and said, are you with me or not? Like, this is a special season, a special group. And they rallied. That defense loved Wade Phillips because he gave them the freedom to be themselves and put them in a position to succeed. Let's not forget, they were extremely talented, DeMarcus Ware and Vaughn, but they were put in position to succeed. And then they had these two pillars kind of guiding the way with DeMarcus Ware and Peyton Manning, that both the defense and offense wanted to send out winners. And then you had one player in Von Miller who was absolutely writing a diary of havoc. He was, I mean, it's hard pressed to find a defensive player that's played a better game than his game against the Patriots in the AFC Championship and his Super Bowl. He absolutely just wrecked game plans. And as it's known, MVP of Super Bowl 50. But it wasn't the greatest game unless you love defense. But remember, that Carolina offense, best offense in the league.
Yeah.
Cam Newton, MVP. They were going to destroy the Broncos. And I picked the Broncos to win because talking to the Broncos players, their plan was to hit Cam Newton, hit Cam Newton, hit Cam Newton, hit Cam Newton. And he had no appetite for running after Jonathan Stewart. He saw him get hurt. Cam Newton had no desire to run the football in that game, and it changed everything.
And, you know, we talk about that Manning era as kind of a single era, but it was such a shift from the beginning of the Manning era to just that last couple of years to have a defense that can carry an offense that had to switch quarterbacks in the middle of the season because their older quarterback in his final season is struggling, and then you have a young quarterback in Osweiler who ended up not being a mainstay in this league. I mean, to have a defense that can carry them, that had to be pretty special to see over the course of a year, just a total shift from one of the best offenses to the best defense.
Well, and when Manning returned, because remember, he was a turnover machine early in that season. I mean, at one point he had double the number of picks to touchdowns. It was like 18-9. I mean, he was really struggling. And the game he broke like the all-time yardage record. He had a 0.0 rating against the Chiefs when his foot finally gave out. But when he returned against the Chargers in the final regular season game, Ryan, that's where, if you remember, Miami beat New England or New England lost, so the Broncos had a chance for home field throughout the playoffs. And Gary Kubiak had just seen enough with Brock that the players weren't responding to him. It wasn't that he was playing terribly. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders had a fumble near the goal line, and there was a bad, blindside blitz. But the point was they weren't responding to Brock. Peyton jogs in. I swear to God, that was like a movie scene. He comes into that stadium, and there's goosebumps from everyone. Like, here he comes. And he didn't play great. He just put him in the right place. And he didn't turn it over. That's pretty much what they told him. Make 2 or 3 plays a game, don't turn it over, and we're winning a championship. And if you look at it, that's exactly what he did. Not unlike Elway in his Super Bowl, in his first one when he won. But it was remarkable. And they told Peyton the year before that, we can't have you throwing 55 times anymore. It's just not going to win us a Super Bowl. And they were right. And the reason they were right is because they had an historically great defense that could control the game, can win the turnover battle every week, and allow you to win ugly. They won low-scoring games consistently because unlike now where they struggle to finish games, that defense, every time the other team had the ball with 2 minutes, you just felt like they were going to make a play, either a big sack, a pick, or a fumble. In almost every case, they did.
So let's get into our final 2 moments. Pretty easy to predict these two. Going back to 1999, this is Elway's final season. The Broncos win Super Bowl 33 over the Atlanta Falcons. Elway, it was his final game, but it wasn't just like he was managing the game. He threw for over 300 yards. The Broncos dominated a Falcons team that was good, but the Falcons also had some drama the week of the Super Bowl, and the Broncos just were in complete control. And Troy, to send John Elway out on top as a back-to-back Super Bowl champion when he had for so many years fallen short and had good teams, and then to finally win back-to-back and send him out, as a champion. He was already a Hall of Famer, but how special was it to have him go back-to-back?
Yeah, especially when you consider, like you said, the Super Bowl losses that were ugly. They got their ears boxed by the second half against the Giants, the Niners game. I mean, the Washington game. It was ugly, and you wondered if he'd ever win one. And even great athletes don't typically end on their own terms with this Disney type ending. They just don't. I mean, mainly because they're not effective at the end of the career, or they're on the wrong team, or team isn't very good. And like you said, Ryan, Elway was an integral part of that championship. The first series, he throws an 80-yard touchdown to Rod Smith. I mean, that was the game right there. I mean, the Falcons, as you mentioned, Eugene Robinson, they're one of their best players. Defensive back gets arrested the night before the game or 2 nights before the game. I mean, they're just scrambling like, what is going on? I mean, he was a pillar on that team. And then he's in coverage as Rod Smith goes for a huge touchdown. And it was like, this game's over. And it was. And John Elway was a huge part of that game. They are offensively under Shanahan. They were, not unlike the Chiefs are now, where they were the class of the league in every way. And they exploited every mismatch. And remember the Hall of Famers they had with this group too. When you're talking about Gary Zimmerman, Shannon Sharp, Terrell Davis, Elway, and every guy on the offensive line was a Pro Bowler except one. You got Ring of Famers and Tom Nalen. I mean, Howard Griffith might be their best fullback they've ever had. So not only were they did they have Elway, they had some of the best players they've ever had in their history and on offense. But to see Elway go out that way, given his struggles early in his career and his struggles in big games, or at least his team struggles in big games, it was something. Like, you just couldn't have imagined that after they were losing those Super Bowls, that his career would end that way. And it's still one of the best endings to a career ever, honestly, given his status in the NFL as a top 10 all-time quarterback, wherever you decide to put him, but he's certainly in the top 10, and he goes out with winning back-to-back titles.
Yeah. And then, of course, our number one moment, you got to back up one more year, but it was the first Super Bowl. It was the Broncos' first Super Bowl win, Elway's first Super Bowl win. This was a win over the Packers, and it was a good Packers team that was coming off of a Super Bowl victory. And to have Elway win that first title, we mentioned how cool it was that he won back-to-back titles, but he probably would have been just as happy just having the one, because it was just, you had to win that one title as a legend is just something that he probably felt like he had to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it validates your career, even if you don't need it. I mean, we get caught up in the rings debate with great athletes, and it's hard to be the greatest of all time if you don't win a ring. With I don't want to disrespect Dan Marino, but nobody considers him the greatest of all time. He never won a ring.
Yeah,
he's in one Super Bowl his second season, I believe. So in Elway's case, it just changed the national how they viewed him. I mean, he's no longer the bridesmaid. This is a guy that not only is maybe the most athletic quarterback the league had ever seen to that point, now he's a champion. And once you're a champion, it's like when I've covered baseball and a guy goes into the Hall of Fame, when you sign your autograph, you sign it HOF, Hall of Famer. That is your legacy. When you're a champion, it's the same thing. Super Bowl champion, and then your name. It becomes your first name in so many ways for all players, but certainly all-time greats. But Ryan, to understand that, if you want to know what that moment means, because I was working at the Daily Times Call then, covering the team as a columnist, and then I ended up being a beat writer and then moving on to the Denver Post. But I covered that season as a columnist. If you want to ask Colorado people their sports moment, ask them, did you know where you were when the Broncos beat the Packers? Most will be able to tell you where they were. That moment was like our Red Sox breaking their World Series jinx by beating the Cardinals. Not really as much time had expired, but that's my point. That was it. Because the Avs had won a championship, but they had arrived from Canada. They weren't Colorado's team, and even they won like the first season. It was this cool story, but you didn't grow up in Colorado watching the Quebec Nordiques and then eventually the Avs. The Broncos are the state's team, and so when they won, I mean, literally, I would go to whether it was a birthday party or an anniversary, a wedding, and people would start talking about that game and they would start crying. I mean, they would be emotional as how much that moment meant to them and their loved ones. And that was to be able to cover that game. I was in the locker room afterward, and we were a PM paper at the Daily Times Call. So I was one of the last ones out of the locker room, and to watch John Elway hug his dad, Jack Elway. And Jack sat next to me in the press box at Old Mile High, where he'd just wiggle in his chair and move every time John was almost getting sacked. It was just really cool to see that father and son moment, because they grew up in football together. His dad was his coach. His dad was the college coach. And to see that father-son moment it was really cool.
Yeah, we'll wrap up here, but this was a very Elway game too. If you look at the box score, his stats aren't going to pop out to you, but he made that one run on third down, the helicopter play, that 2 plays later, they score a touchdown, take the lead in the third quarter. How much did that play really just kind of put in a nutshell, the kind of player Elway was for the Broncos through the years?
Well, he competed. I mean, at that point, he's what, 37 on that play, and it's a first down. No one's going to be ashamed if he slides there or runs out of bounds. And it was just everything was coming together where this was what he felt might be his last shot to win this game. And he wasn't going to leave anything. He was going to leave everything on the field. And that moment on the sideline, it just symbolized, like, if you're a young player, another player, like this nearly 40-year-old guy can dive into oncoming traffic. What have I got to lose here? And it symbolized all these years coming together of he wasn't going to let this one slip away. He just wasn't. And there was a huge stop at the end. Steve Atwater played great in that game, John Mobley. But that play, for reasons that connect to his career, is a defining moment because of the fact that if not for Elway, they weren't a national team. If not for Elway, frankly, they probably weren't in those previous Super Bowls. He was that good carrying him. And he wasn't their best player on the field that night, but he did provide the most memorable moment. Their best player was Terrell Davis. And John will tell you that. He would not have finally won one without Terrell Davis. But that moment symbolized how much that game meant to him. And then certainly the final on the podium with Pat Bowlen raising the trophy up and saying, "This one's for John." I mean, it was poetic, given those of us who followed his career from day one to that moment.
Yeah, and any younger Bronco fans out there, go find that play of Elway's run on third down on YouTube, the helicopter play where he gets hit by 3 defenders and gets spun around, and then the announcers are just like, how bad does he want to win this game? And he did, and they finished the game. And you mentioned the play from Steve Atwater and another Hall of Famer, and then Terrell Davis. That whole Broncos era had so many superstars, Ring of Famers, like you mentioned, Hall of Famers. Those were the good old days. Hopefully the Broncos can get back on track Thursday night against the Jets, who, as we've said, they're probably the lowest of the low in the NFL right now with their struggles on offense and defense. So hopefully the Broncos defense should be able to handle Sam Darnold and the Jets. But Troy, thanks for hopping on with us today. And like we were saying, it's not hard to find 7 great moments in Broncos history. And we'll just hope they make a few more ones pretty soon.
Yeah, love talking Broncos, love going down memory lane. And brighter days are ahead at some point. I keep saying that. It's got to get better at some point. It's 5 years removed from that Super Bowl season. And it just feels like at some point it's going to turn. Let's hope.
Well, hang in there, Broncos fans, and we'll, the game will be on Denver 7 on Thursday night. We'll have coverage up until then, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
All right, you heard it there. Ryan and Troy have wrapped. Enjoy it, man. Fun to go down memory lane, especially right now. Anybody who watched that game yesterday or any of the first 3 games of this Broncos season, times are not as great as what Ryan and Troy were just dishing on there. You can go find that video. It'll live in perpetuity on our Facebook page. If you want to go leave a comment, share it with your friends. Some great insight from Troy. He's been covering the Broncos for years. He's always got the most fascinating things to say. So go find that stuff on our Facebook page. We'll have coverage all throughout the week. Again, Thursday Night Football. You heard Ryan there right at the wrap. Thursday Night Football on Denver 7. We're really excited about it. And it's the hometown team, Denver Broncos, New York Jets. That's 6 p.m. on Thursday. Coverage starts at 5:30. We'll have Denver 7 News at 4 and the 5 o'clock news. And then, boom, we'll roll right into the ESPN and ABC coverage of that game. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for our coverage throughout the week. We're going to take a quick break right here on streaming. We've got about 19 minutes and 18 and a half minutes or so till Denver 7 News at 11. Stick with us. 2 minutes. We'll have more news on the way.